Search up tutorials on Hello, I'm Mimi and I run Studio Memory. I've been making sticker sheets for over 3 years now and I know how hard it is. For a little context, when I first started making sticker sheets, I hated the process so much that I had to vlog myself doing it in order to motivate myself to actually finish. I went through so much trial and error, so today I want to show you all of my processes from finding inspiration online to sketching, line art, and coloring. And throughout the video, I'll also provide tips and tricks on ways to make your art more interesting and stand out from others. So if you're looking to make sticker sheets or start a small business, then I think you're in the right place. Let's get started. Okay, so first we're going to go over all the different tools that I use. Now, this is just everything that I've collected over the years, so you don't necessarily need to have all the tools I have, but you can always just start with the really basic, which is having a tablet and you can draw with your fingers. So let me show you everything that I'm using. So I currently draw on the iPad Air 4, which I got back in 2021 when it initially released. And this is the pencil I use. It's the Apple Pencil 2 that came out around when the iPad was released. I got this with my first part-time job, so it's actually quite exciting that I'm still using it. For the Apple Pencil, you might notice that I use a metal tip, and I think it works really well with the matte screen protector. So the matte screen protector that I use is currently magnetic, so I'm able to take it off whenever I want, and it will stick back on really easily. I prefer this setup because it gives me a really tactile feeling when I draw, and it really makes a difference throughout my drawing process, especially if I draw for 2 to 3 hours at a time. So let's talk about software. So for the software, I use Procreate. I really enjoyed how friendly the interface on Procreate is, and that's one of the main reasons why I use it. But I also recommend Medibank or Fire Alpaca if you're interested in a free software. So upon opening up Procreate, I have the size of my template here. So this is 93 by 140 millimeters. And that's my template. Now, I already customized the template for myself with a header. When I start, I typically grab the header from another artwork I'm doing and then paste it into my canvas. That way I can have it prepared and know that this is the spot I cannot draw on. If you're interested in the templates, I will have them posted on my Kofi. So for this tutorial, I've included the template and the brush pack in my Kofi shop below here for free. So right now you can see that I have my brushes, but I will be uploading the template once this tutorial is over. Now for inspiration. So here is how I find inspiration when I'm not feeling inspired. I typically like to generate a word web of different elements that are related to the season or what's popular. And then I will search for those ideas on Pinterest or look at other artists online to see how they drew a theme that's similar to that idea. So for example, my idea this time is of Miffy and the Mid-Autumn Festival. So things I thought of that are related to the Mid-Autumn Festival was mooncakes, the moon, and rabbit candy. I felt like that was not enough elements to include, so I went on Pinterest and searched up words like mooncakes so I can see all the different mooncakes and recreate the mooncake in my own style. I also searched up the word Mid-Autumn Festival and I saw a lot of different motifs like lanterns and plum blossoms. I also thought of the story, and if you don't know the story, it's basically of a moon goddess who drank one too many immortality potions and flew to the moon, and now she's stuck there for the rest of her life, but she gets a little rabbit to accompany her. I thought Miffy would be like the perfect rabbit to represent that rabbit on the moon, so I drew her with the moon, and she's also in the costume of the moon goddess for funsies. And to be honest, you can go even further with that. So for example, the moon is related to the sky, so you can think about a lot of elements like the stars or the clouds, and there's so much ideas to come up with. First, I'm going to show you how I download the brush pack from my Kofi shop and import it to Procreate. For this value, you can enter in $0 and then get now. You will check out and then you'll receive an email, or you can view the contents here, and I will click to download. At the bottom here, I will save it to my files, and then I will click open in. Downloaded is here. Select that to unzip the brush set, and then click that, and it will open up Procreate and download it. So now you see that it has been downloaded here. Here are the brushes I like to use. So this lineart brush is the brush I use for making my icon stickers. The second brush, named lineart 2, is the brush I use to make my stickers. And lineart 1 is the brush I use for illustrating my illustrations. So you might see that when I draw, it's very smooth, and that's because for all of them, I already set up a specific stabilization for them. You might also notice that I don't have any sketch brushes, and that's because I like to sketch with my lineart brush, because I try to make sure my sketches are as clean as possible while being as fast as possible. Other brushes I have is the flat coloring. This is mostly used to color, and then I will drop color in and it fills in really well. I also have a soft coloring, and it allows me to have different variances in opacity so I can make shading. I also have the airbrush, and that is usually used for making gradients whenever I want a more gradual change of color. I also included a lot of deco brushes, so you might notice sparkle tiny, and it makes a tiny sparkle. I have 3 sizes: the lined ones and circles. So that is all of the brushes that I have in this pack. We're now going to get started on the sketches. At the time of filming my illustration from Procreate, I didn't make sure it focused properly, so it is kind of blurry, but I'm still going to play the clips so that I can discuss what I'm referring to. I have my notebook here that you might notice, and this is so I can make sure I'm going through all of the details that I want to discuss while I make the sticker sheet with you. So let's get into it. So when I'm making sketches, I will use lineart 2, which is the brush I use for my line art and my sketches. Even though I use a stabilized brush, the number 1 rule is to make your sketches as loose as possible. Since it's not meant to be perfect, it's just a way to get your ideas down as fast as possible. And when making sticker sheets, I have a personal rule where I include at least 2 to 3 elements that must be of the character, using the elements as props. So in this example, you can see I have a couple variations of Miffy. The first one is her standing alone. Next is her dressed in a special outfit. Another one is her holding the milk candy. And then I also have one of her holding a mooncake and one of her on the moon. You can also vary it up with the way she's holding the mooncake. So one of them is a full piece of the mooncake, whereas the other one is just a slice of the mooncake. My second rule is that each element can only repeat a max of 2 to 3 times, and if they do repeat, then I recommend you flip to add more variance or layer them up so that they are more dynamic and fun. So for example, I have the plum blossom here. I have it multiple times throughout the sticker sheet individually, layered on top of each other in 2s, layered on top of each other in 3s, and another one here which is a flipped version of that to add a little variance. Then I also have the plum blossom on the moon in this example and this example, and I also have the plum blossoms as a decorative element in the lantern and on the mooncakes. You might also notice this for the mooncakes. I have a full mooncake here and a slice of the mooncake. Now I made another variation, which is the mooncake that's slightly sliced, and you can see the piece right next to it. Now this is a variation of this mooncake, but you see that it includes a flower so that it looks slightly different, but at the same time it makes the sticker sheet look very cohesive and put together. Same goes for the lanterns. These are basically the same lanterns. I flipped them over so that way they look slightly different. Additional optional things that you can do is add text on the sticker sheet, and then later on I'm also going to talk about how you can use different color variations to add a little more variance to your art to make it more interesting. So now we're up to the line art process. When doing the line art, I will lower the sketch layer to a lower opacity from around 5 to 10% so that it's light enough for me to see the artwork when I do the line art, but also make sure that I know what I'm actually drawing. And then I will create a new layer group because I've made mistakes before and accidentally drew in the wrong layer. So having a group helps me prevent that. And feel free to test the brushes and see what works for you, get comfortable, and then start drawing. I would recommend you draw each individual element in a new layer and then merge them at the end. This way, if you want to erase anything, you will only be erasing the current mistake that you're making rather than accidentally erasing something that you were already happy with or different elements, because accidents can happen. And this is probably one of my favorite processes, and I really try to take my time with it and make sure that it's perfect before I move on to coloring. It's very therapeutic for me, so I would put up some music or video in the background and draw away. Since we're on the topic of line art, I wanted to show you 4 ways you can make your line art more interesting and some additional tips, so maybe 8 ways. Method number 1 is to purposely include gaps in your line art. Every time I include a gap, I make 2 dots. This makes the line art look a little more soft and fluffy, but the con of that is that coloring is very difficult because I have to manually color in the artwork. You can change it up by doing 1 dot or leaving bigger gaps in between or no dots at all, and it changes up the way your line art works, making it going from looking very stiff to a lot more soft and fluffy. Method number 2, coloring in the corners where your line art meets. Whenever 2 lines are meeting, they are forming these sharp edges with each other, and you can soften up your line art by coloring it in and rounding out those sharp edges to create a softer vibe. Method number 3, instead of using a normal brush, a lot of artists also like to use textured brushes, and this adds a lot of interest to the line art because the texture in the line art makes it look a little busier so that there's more interest. I don't really know how to describe it, but when you see the comparison at the end, you will see how the texture compares to the straight line art. Method number 4, vary up the pen pressure for your artwork. So instead of keeping your line art all one size like I typically do, you can switch it up where the smaller details get a thinner line art, and that also adds a little more interest because you're switching up how the line art is going. So here is a comparison comparison of all four next to each other, and you can see how they create a different vibe based on what you do. This is all personal preference, and I'm showing you all the methods so you can choose what you prefer to do for your art. Additionally, you can also create a combination of all the four methods, and so I'm using a textured brush here, making gaps in between, and then coloring in the corners and using different pen pressure settings. I also use my favorite brush, which is also another textured brush, but because the texture is different, it ends up creating a completely different vibe to the artwork too. So now that I've shown you all four methods, I'm also going to show you how coloring your line art can affect the vibe of your artwork. So I have four different variations where the line art is just one colored black and then a line art with a different color, and then I have a third option, which is where you color inside the line art but keep the borders a darker color. Option 4 is what I typically like to do, which is to color in the details inside the artwork just slightly darker of the color that I'm using. So here's how they look without any color, and here's how they look with color, and you can see the different vibes that you create. And again, this is all personal preference. I'm not saying if there's any one that's better than the other. Now that I have the line art completed, I'm going to make the borders, cut lines, and bleed line. We're going to start off with the line art layer here, and I'm going to duplicate it and hide the original line art. For the duplicated layer, I duplicate it again multiple times so that the lines are very nice and bold. To merge it, after merging the image, go to the select tool here. Make sure you're using automatic selection. Select the negative space and drag all the way to the left like so. Your selection threshold should be 0%. Select invert. All your illustrations are highlighted. To create a new layer, move it to under the line art layer, and select fill layer. So now you see that your illustration is entirely filled up with color. To make the bleed, duplicate this layer and then use the Gaussian blur tool. I like to blur around 3%. And then exit out of the Gaussian blur. So you will see that the edges are blurry now. Make sure that the only layers that are showing is the line art layer and the layer that you just blurred. Select the select tool. Make sure automatic is on. And then I'm going to select one of the illustrations, but drag it all the way to the right this time. And I'm going to make my threshold as high as I can without it selecting the whole image, like this. Repeat for all of the other images by clicking on them. Once you have selected all of your images like this, open up a new layer, and I'm going to pick the color blue so that I can see what I've done. And we're going to select it, layer, then fill in that layer. Now you're going to see that each sticker has a border around them, and that's what I want. Delete the gray layer since they're no longer needed, and the duplicated layer. Now you should have only your original line art and your border. So let's name it. Now let's make the cut lines. It's a very similar process. Duplicate your border and then blur your border. For the border, I only blur out 1%. Now we're going to repeat by using the select tool and drag it as far as you can to the right. You'll see that it highlights just ever so slightly on the edge. Now I will select all of my images. Once that's selected, create a new layer and then fill it in. I like to fill the cut line with a red color to make it very obvious. So now you will see that your cut line has been created. As a side note, you may notice that the cut lines are too close to each other. If you notice this happening, then you would want to decrease your blur percentage by at least 1 or 2% to make sure that they're not too cluttered together like this, because otherwise it may result in issues when cutting. But to avoid any confusions, I'm going to keep going so that way I can show all of the steps, but you will have to repeat the process and fix this if you notice this happening. Delete the duplicated border layer. If you hide the border layer, you're going to see that your cut line looks like this instead. To make sure that it only shows the cut line, click the border and click select, then click on the cut line layer, just move it out of the way. This way it only selects the blue image and keeps whatever's outside. So now when you hide your border line, you will notice that it shows the cut lines perfectly, like this. Now we're going to make the bleed lines, and bleed is very important. So the bleed is very similar to borders, but this time it will be outside the cut lines instead. And the reason why it's important to have bleed is because it allows for user allowance, especially if the cutting becomes slightly off, and that way it will help to make sure that the sticker still looks centered. It is not needed if you plan to make the background of your sticker white, but since I usually have a colored background, I need to make a border. So to do this, it will be a very similar process. We're going to duplicate the border. I'm going to gloss and blur it by 3% again. And then using the automatic select tool, select all of the images. And this time, it's okay if they overlap this because it's just a bleed for error allowance. I'm going to create a new layer and move it to below my cut line layer. And to be able to see it easily visually, I'm going to select a different color so that it stands out. And I'm going to fill it in. Delete the duplicated border layer. I'm going to change this color to a different color so it's easier to see. So now you can see I have the border, the cut line, and the bleed. For my sticker borders, I typically like to make them white, so I'm going to alpha lock all the images and fill it in with white. So now you have your cut lines. So if you hide the background images, you'll see that this is your setup. I'm going to be using another color for the background later, so I'm going to drop that in, and then I group all of these together. For the coloring process, I will typically hide this so that I can color without being affected by anything, and then we will start the coloring process. You might be wondering why I do the borders, cut lines, and bleed before I color in the stickers. And the reason for this is because I want to make sure I have enough room for all of the elements on my sticker sheet before I color, since there has been occurrences where I had to delete images off my sticker sheet to make more space so that they all fit and that the cut lines do not overlap one another. So doing it ahead of time will save me all of the wasted time in coloring and adding details when I might not actually be using that element in my sticker sheet. After creating the borders, cut lines, and bleed, you might notice that I added more elements. And this is just for me to fill up any additional space because one of my personal preferences is to maximize out all of the space in my sticker sheet. But essentially, it's a very similar process to how I make the borders, cut lines, and bleed. I chose not to include that in this video because I think it may confuse you, especially for those who may be new to making sticker sheets. After finishing all of the cut lines and bleed, I'm going to start the coloring process. So I'm going to hide this layer where I have all my bleed, and then I'm going to choose a background color that's pretty neutral, like a darker gray. The reason for this is because I want to make sure that the light colors I choose don't look too dark on a white background, nor do I want them to look too light on a dark background. So I usually go for a middle ground of gray. Put the line art in a group by itself so that I can't touch it until later on. Then I'm going to create a new layer group and start coloring. For coloring, I usually like to color in my characters first because I know what their exact colors are since I already have a set palette for them. In this case, it would be of Cream wearing the Miffy hat and of all of the Miffies here. And the brush I use would be the flat coloring brush. What I do is I basically outline the layers and then use the color drop tool to drop it in. Then rinse and repeat. I also make sure that for each color that I'm working with, I make it on a separate layer. So now I finished coloring in Cream. She's going to be on layer 16, and on layer 17, I'm going to color in Miffy because she's white. So now I finished coloring in Miffy. I'm going to repeat the process by grouping them by elements and color in a single layer. So for the next layer, I'm going to do the plum blossoms, and I also want to add another tip. For places where I notice that multiple of the same elements repeat, I will make sure that I add a little more interest by putting in different colors. So for example, 2 of the blossoms will be pink, And the other one under is going to be just a little bit darker to add some more visual interest. I will also do the same for the leaves. Like so. So now I will be using these set of colors for the plum blossoms and repeat that throughout the rest of the sticker sheet. So while I speed up the video so that you can watch me color, I'm also going to talk about a couple other tips that I recommend you keep in mind. The reason why I color by object is that it's easier, so I don't have to constantly change colors per element. Instead, it's easier for me to keep track of what I colored in and what I didn't color in based on the same element. Next, I recommend that you have around a max of 3 to 5 colors. You can choose to add more if you like, but the reason why I try to limit the color palette is because I want to make it feel cohesive and easy to follow for the sticker sheet. I will group my colors based on main colors and accent colors. The main colors in this sticker sheet will most likely going to be white, gold, yellow, browns, since a majority of the elements are mooncakes and the Miffy. Accent colors I'm going to include pink, green, blue, and red. Those are the elements that are more decorative to the sticker sheet. I recommend adding more textures and patterns, add shading, or search up tutorials on color theory to make your sticker sheets more interesting. I finished coloring in my artwork and added all the shading and details. So now I'm going to get started on coloring the line art. For the line art, I prefer to use a dark brown color instead of black since it looks a little softer. And then I'm going to pick colors that are slightly darker than my colors and then color in the lines inside the artwork. For example, when coloring this mooncake, I'm going to pick a color that's a little darker and warmer and then fill in the lines from here. I think this way it makes the artwork a lot more interesting than just having it like this. And I'm going to repeat that with the rest of my artwork. You might be wondering why I didn't color in this line, and the reason for this is because I consider them as two different objects, and I like to keep the line between two objects darkest so then I can see the contrast between them. When lines overlap, I may also color them in. I forgot to mention, sometimes the line art acts more like a detail, so I may choose to color a different color rather than the darker line as in the rule that I explained before. And for this example, I wanted the plum blossom to have that yellow pollen center, and hence why I colored the line art yellow instead. As a side note, I'm also going to mention that a lot of these decisions are mostly personal preferences, and I'm including them in this video as a guide in case you are ever wondering why other artists are doing a certain thing. And I've collected so much observations throughout the 3 years of being a small business owner and a illustrator that I hope that these information can be collectively in one place to be easily referenced and learned from. I've completed the sticker sheet, so I'm going to just hide the gray background now and show and collapse all of my groups. I'm also going to show the layer with the cut lines and borders. This is my border layer, and I'm going to group it with the sticker design. The line art layer will also go into that group, so they are together. I finished adding the details, and I'm going to send the sticker off to my manufacturer. If you're producing stickers by yourself, I have created another tutorial in the past on how to cut stickers with the silhouette. I'll be referencing that below somewhere up here. Otherwise, if you are sending this to a manufacturer, what I do is I will duplicate my files and then start merging stuff together. So the header is merged, and everything in my sticker layer is also merged. And lastly, I'll merge the two cut line layers, and then I'll merge the bleed with the background layer. I'll also bring down the title image to merge with the background layer, and then I'll delete everything else. This way, I only have 3 layers. And when I send it to my manufacturer, it will be super easy for them to understand the 3 layers. When sharing the layers, make sure you're sharing in PSD, and that way it will make sure it saves all 3 files separately, and I will save it to files. Then I will typically upload it on Alibaba and send it to my manufacturer. Now that we're done with the sticker sheet, I am going to be sending it to my manufacturer. Since the video is getting a little long, I won't be showing the process on how to outsource the stickers, but if you're interested in that, please let me know. I will make a video on this if there are enough interest. Overall, the process for me to get the stickers take around 3 to 4 weeks. I hope to get them by the end of November so that I can do one final shop update before the year is over, and I would love to have these stickers out for everyone to see. In the next clip, I will be showing you the sticker after I receive them and show you how they turn out. So I'll see you very soon. The stickers finally arrived. It took a really long time because I was planning to order them when I ordered my monthly mail club stickers, but I kept forgetting them. So I ended up picking a local sticker manufacturer in the US, and they had a Black Friday sale, so it was a really good deal. Here's how they turned out, and I think they are really perfect, and I'm super excited for them to be on my shop next year.